Good evening, everybody. Hell's Unicorn here once again. I've had a little bit of an epiphany here in these past couple of days after sampling some online news and actually even going on to the brain-destroying television news for a little bit of information. I've got some links in the description that add a little bit of context to what I'm going to be talking about here. There is really only one way to wholly and accurately describe the current Republican primary process as it stands right now. Chaos. Chaos is the only way to describe it. Everybody is scrambling to either qualify or disqualify a certain choice, and along with it, all other choices not fitting in. We have various establishment types, such as my good friend Karl Rove, the Antichrist himself, along with somewhat more old school guys like George Will, dumping on Newt Gingrich, along with a host of former representatives and even current representatives that served under him when he was House Speaker. And they all say the same thing. The guy's erratic. The guy has no discipline. He really doesn't have a core set of values that he adheres to. He's sort of the quintessential political chameleon. He can change his colors to fit whatever surrounding he's in. But if you take his record as a whole, you will note a slight sort of progressive bent to a lot of his ideas. Now, when people say progressive, they usually tend to argue, open-minded, tolerant of people of different viewpoints and blah, 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 blah. But if you look at the origins of the ideology, you go back to the people that Newt Gingrich describes as his intellectual forefathers, such as Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Progressivism takes on a very different form. I mean, after all, Theodore Roosevelt was very much a heavy-handed authoritarian. Economically, he is beloved by many socialists because they have their own quirky little authoritarianism. Of course, they always argue that it's in defense of the poor and all of this crap. There is no better way to serve the poor than to keep them that way for the rest of their lives. And then Woodrow Wilson. Both of these guys were certifiable warmongers, and Woodrow Wilson was an outright racist. There's nothing in the progressive ideology and its roots that argues against having a racist outlook. In fact, I'd argue that most progressives of a minority disposition seem to have a very big problem with most of the whites living in this country. But throughout it all, it's pretty clear that Newt Gingrich is coming from a sort of progressive mindset. And after doing his little interview with Newt Gingrich, Glenn Beck has actually inadvertently thrown a lot of fuel onto an already out-of-control fire by asserting that because there is no real ideological difference between Newt Gingrich and Barack Obama, and this is something he actually gets right. A broken clock can be right twice a day here. On the real substantive issues, Newt Gingrich and Barack Obama might as well be joined at the hip. Both warmongers, both very much in favor of destroying our civil and constitutional rights whenever it suits their purposes, very much pro-war on terror, very much pro-government growth. There's nothing in Newt Gingrich's tax plan that does anything to address the growth of government, and there's absolutely nothing that would suggest that he would do anything to curtail the deficit spending going on, which is currently taking our economy into the gutter. And if he's not addressing deficit spending, there's no way he can address the Federal Reserve issue the way he pretends to want to do. So really, there is no substantive difference. So there's really only one way, according to Glenn Beck, that you can choose Newt Gingrich over Barack Obama, and that is you want your progressive with a lighter shade of skin than the other guy. Now, coming from my standpoint, I don't think that's the actual reason why most people are supporting Newt Gingrich. I think most people are supporting Newt Gingrich because they're ignorant, they don't know the guy's full history, and they need to educate themselves. However, a lot of people that I've spoken to don't want to know these things. It's not that they don't know these things, it's that they don't want to know these things. I tell them, Newt Gingrich started up the Department of Education, voted for it. I'm actually linked in the description. A site says notonewt.com. Fully lists everything that he's done in his career since the late 70s that perfectly mirrors the ideology of a liberal Democrat. I refer people that are supporters of Newt to this site. They call me some liberal whack job. Oh, I'm the liberal because I'm pointing out Newt's liberal positions. And then others say, oh, I don't care, I just want to win. Now, that doesn't come from a standpoint of race necessary, but it is an issue of party politics. And as I always say, there is no logic in politics, and there is definitely no logic in voting for the same exact thing as what you've already got, just with a different suit and tie and a different party affiliation. That's what this is really all about. You put two football teams against each other in a 100-yard field, the only thing that really separates them is the quality of their attack and defense people and their uniforms. You don't really gain anything out of whoever wins or loses unless you're gambling. And indeed, that's what politics is right now. It's gambling. At least that's what it is for the lobbyists. The lobbyists are like bookies, and they lay down bets on their winners, and they get favors when they win, so they get their payback. And if you think about it also, there is time for the, there's a little room for the analogy of the South Park episode, Giant Douche versus Turd Sandwich. And people argue that Newt Gingrich and Barack Obama, that would be a debate to see, because Newt Gingrich would supposedly wipe the floor with Barack Obama. I think the giant douche turd sandwich scenario is precisely what you would get between those two, and it's what you're getting right now between Romney and Gingrich right now. They're not arguing over who was more conservative, they're arguing over who was the bigger douche or the bigger turd sandwich. I mean, I watched that debate on Saturday. There wasn't really any back and forth between actual substantive differences between the two of them. They were basically just kind of nitpicking each other. Excuse me. Anyway, in addition to all of this, there's been continued back and forth over the recent gaffe that Newt Gingrich had with regards to the Palestinian issue, and this is something that is coming back to haunt him. His polling numbers in Iowa are starting to dwindle a little bit, and I think that's probably the chief culprit. That, and I think some of the ads that Ron Paul has been running are actually starting to stick. He's lost about, I would say, 4 to 5 percentage points if you look at the polls from when he first peaked at around 34% of where he is now, which is in the high 20s. If that rate continues, he will be into the high teens by the time the caucuses come around, and Ron Paul will be in a position to win. If things continue in the chaotic fashion that they are right now, and if Romney's people and Gingrich's people continue to pile on each other, they will destroy each other. And then who's going to be left standing? Michelle Bachmann? She's not going anywhere. Maybe Rick Santorum? He's never been anywhere, let alone he's not going anywhere now. John Huntsman? Not in Iowa. He's living in New Hampshire right now. He might make some kind of a play in New Hampshire, but that'll be the extent of it. The only person that could maybe come up from behind and get a little bit in Iowa is probably Rick Perry, because he's definitely courting the evangelical crowd something fierce, and he does have the money. Whether or not he can maintain his war chest is another question, but he definitely still has money. So he would be the one to watch more than the other two supposed ultra-conservative fringe candidates that are still in the race, and Bachmann and Santorum. But the fact that Beck, Glenn Beck, Mr. 912, Mr. Arranged the greatest Tea Party event of all time, has actually stated that he would support Ron Paul over Gingrich even in a three-way race between him, Obama, and Gingrich. That is going to be sending shockwaves through the Tea Party. The Tea Party is going to be fighting within itself over who they're going to be supporting. And all Ron Paul has to do is make his presence known. He can attack Gingrich because when the Tea Party, the Fox fake 2009 Tea Party starts to eat each other, whatever's going to be left is going to be looking for an alternative. And with Bachmann and Santorum not really in the picture, that leaves only one person. Or two if you count Perry. You can't fully count Perry out because just as the same with Gingrich, you have to factor in the idiot factor of a very good chunk of the Republican electorate, I'm very sad to say. But I think, in some respects, chaos could be our friend. I think a good order could actually come out of chaos if we play our cards right. And so I'm all for promoting the current chaos that's going on. Amid all of the back and forth between the Gingrich camp and the Romney camp, Ron Paul's supposed fringe viewpoints are not being discussed. Mark Levin and Rush Limbaugh have tried to bring it up on their shows because they're afraid that Paul is going to pull an upset because of all this chaos. But nobody's listening to them because I'm not hearing it on any of the mainstream media. And I definitely didn't hear any business about that after the debate this Saturday. Nobody really takes Levin seriously anyway. He's a joke. So it's definitely something to think about. And I've put some links to some recent news articles to kind of bolster my case about this. Glenn Beck, I don't think he's really an asset or a liability. I think he's just out there on his own doing his own thing. And I think in some ways he's helped us here. He would have hurt us had he been a full and complete supporter because he's way too dramatic. He would probably do to us what some other overly flamboyant supporters of other candidates did for them, particularly some of Rick Perry's off-base evangelical supporters, particularly that minister that made that crack about Mormonism. I'm not equating that guy with Glenn Beck, but there are gaffes of similar magnitude that Glenn Beck has made when stating A, B, or C, and I don't want that associated with the Paul camp. It's bad enough that we have to apologize for viewpoints that actually make sense, such as wanting to end the foreign wars and wanting an actual hard currency and full disclosure of the amount of that currency in circulation, let alone all of the clearly irrational stuff coming out of Beck. Anyway, it's all something to think about. So until next time, with prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.